Good.
Okay, all right, well, it's preparing is good. All right, in the meantime, for your YouTube live, I'm gonna,
There you go.
all right, we're making progress, good. All right, let me take attendance first, and then we'll say a prayer, and then I'll share screen PowerPoint, and we'll get started. Okay. Let's see, Juliana Anderson. Okay. Aaron Bates.
I'm here.
Okay, Aaron.
I'm under
Yeah.
AJ.
I need to, let's see there. There we go. AJ Bates. Great, perfect. Okay. David, David up there. Okay. Matthew and Timothy at the top of it. Okay. Grayson McCord. There you are,
I'm here.
Grayson. Okay, Jenny Glatch.
I'm here.
Okay. Tina Marinova, I doubt it. She has come to only one. Okay. Penelope Lindsay? No. Okay. Tom Morrissey? No, he never came to anything. John Phillips? Is John here? No. All right. Alyssa Python?
Yeah, I'm here.
Here you are. Okay. Hi, everybody. Linda Park.
She's right here. Linda. I didn't hear you, so.
I was gonna say, she's coming to my Bible study.
I have been at your Bible study.
Yes, okay. Irene Stathalopoulos.
Here.
Oh, okay. Come I did well, guys. It's been a few weeks, so I just. All right, Ryan Urbaniak.
Here.
No, sorry. Cynthia Van Buserk.
I'm here.
Buserk. And Blake Wilkinson.
Hello.
Yeah, there you are.
I'm here.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see. All right. We'll do a quick prayer to the Holy Spirit. Heavenly King, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life. Come and abide in us, cleanse us of every stain, and of your goodness save our souls.
Amen.
All right. So tonight, guys, we are in an it's a little bit different than everything we've done so far. We kind of passed a lot of theology. You had a lot of theology thrown at you. But now we're in a more historical mode. So if it feels like a lot of history, well, it's because it's history. However, it also helps us to understand where we are, how we got here, how the church is structured, and I don't know exactly what you've been told about the structure of the church in terms of its greater presence. So I will mention that at the beginning, but it will impact us to some extent. However, our focus today, all right, once it comes on up there, and let's put it into PowerPoint mode. Okay, you can do it. Come on, you can do it. There we go. It's coming up right in a second. Okay. Let's get rid of this here. How do I can see that? Okay. So this is a lovely icon of the saints of North America, so far recognized and canonized. And as you can see, there's one tucked in the corner because she's a very recently recognized and canonized saint, Saint Olga of Alaska. It happened last summer. So as of yet, I have not found an icon that collects them all together. So I decided to stick her in myself. In any case, the idea here for today is to try and understand who we are here in America. And we do have a particular identity, a particular expression, and a particular history. So all of that kind of come together. Let's see. Today we're going to reflect on certain questions, and I do want anybody to feel free to interrupt me, ask a question, ask for clarification, if necessary. But we will be sort of trotting through some historical events and moments and how that has shaped us and brought the church to who it is today. There are some fundamental questions to explore. That is, how are we one church when you definitely see a multiplicity? And in what sense are we many churches? The specific landscape of Orthodox life in America today, what does that look like? And let me tell you, it will look different in Greece, it'll look different in Australia. There will be connections, there'll be correlations and correspondences, but there are some things that are actually unique to our life here. And it comes out of the way we came here, the way we've evangelized, and of course, the interaction with the culture here. So the question is, how did we get to where we are today? We'll take a look at that. We'll explore what is unique about the history and experience of the Orthodox Church in its American reality. And even someplace like Australia that people would think is basically another version of the church in America, that isn't. I mean, there are very strong correlations, but there are significant differences too. And well, we'll sort of cast our eyes ahead and say, what is in the future for the Orthodox Church or churches in America? So just to sort of get us a broad, I don't know if you've covered this. I would hope it's sort of in one of those earlier classes that you took. Okay, I kind of see a nod over there from Irene, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. But the Orthodox Church is one way to understand how we are related to each other structurally is that it's a family of self-governed autocephalous churches. Autocephalous is just that fancy word, meaning that it basically elects its own head. Doesn't look anywhere else for in order to get approval or to designate who leads this particular family. There are Orthodox churches that are what we call autonomous. The Church of Finland, for example, is autonomous. It actually looks to a patriarchate for the only when it comes to designating the head of that particular community. Everything else it does on its own. The unifying elements are very strong amongst the autocephalous churches. It includes the way we worship. It includes all of the prayer life of the church. It includes participation in the sacraments and our faith or doctrine. So, at least in theory, okay, I could go to any Orthodox seminary that is what we would call canonical, but is recognized as being amongst this group as being authoritative, and I would not learn something different than in another Orthodox seminary, although there are nuances and kind of like leanings, the basic truths are the same, and we share sacrament and worship. Now you might say, well, I've gone to, the church in Cyprus, and it feels kind of different than the church in Russia. So then we get not down to the essence of worship and sacrament, but rather its expression. And this is where you will see differences. The expression of the faith is embodied, it's incarnate, it carries the life of the people, and therefore you will have the way it comes out in music, the way, hi, Father, we couldn't get in, so Father, finally, Leah opened the door here. She left the doors open, she said, but she couldn't, they must have relocked or something, so. We almost came in through the church, but she was able to get the side door unlocked, so.
Okay, so you're okay.
We're good, we're good. We're even on the internet. We did that. We did it this time.
Have a good night.
All right, thank you. So the way it sounds, maybe, some of the way the iconography is comes out, you'll see a more what we call Byzantine style. It's a little bit sharper, it's a little severe amongst the further east communities in Greece. But as you head towards the west in Russia or Ukraine, it'll be a softer focus on the features. None of that pertains to anything of like significant substance. It's the expression. But it does show you that faith has to be lived and expressed. And you bring it to America, right? You're going to have to ask yourself, what does that mean for people who are born and raised here? How will the expression of faith begin to look and sound a little different while remaining authentic to what is shared? Now we're going to head deep into a few hundred years back. Okay. Because
Can I ask you
yeah,
a question about
sure.
the previous
Go ahead.
slide? So can you go back to the previous slide, because you had a bunch of autocephalous churches and then you named just churches of Cyprus after okay, so you have
There you go.
patriarchate and then you just have the churches.
Good question.
Okay.
So some of the churches are headed by the patriarch. That is the title for the highest authority.
Mhm.
But some of the churches are not. They're headed by an archbishop.
Oh,
There are historical reasons for that.
okay.
These are churches, for the most part, except for the Church of Cyprus, which is very ancient. The other churches came about later in time and owed their existence to other church communities, to a patriarchate. And in sort of deference to the patriarchate, they didn't establish their own identity as having a patriarch. And there are other factors that go into it. Okay. I did not put up contested Orthodox communities. That is, communities that are recognized as canonical by some, but not by all. You will notice there is no OCA on that chart. Now that's a big one because in America, the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America, is a very active and I mean the seminary at St. Vladimir's is run by the OCA. We have many active parishes. Why is it not up there? You'll also notice that the Church of Ukraine is not up there. All right, so again, for political, historical, and sometimes canonical reasons, the OCA's canonical status was not recognized by the ecumenical patriarch. He's the one, right at the top on the left, and churches that were connected to him. Interestingly enough, the decision was made to go ahead and share education, worship, sacraments. But there's some elements of canonicity still in dispute. I didn't put them up. Ukraine. If you know anything about what has happened amongst the Orthodox in the last, let's see, it's about, what is it now? 8 years? The Church of Ukraine was recognized by the ecumenical patriarch, not by the Patriarchate of Russia, and it has led to heartbreak, guys. The Church of Russia, the Patriarch of Russia, has refuses communion with the ecumenical patriarchate. So they've broken communion, which has led to some major divisions and encampments on two sides, and this obviously needs to be healed. Okay. And from my humble perspective, and I am not a great authority, but of course, the Greek church here, the Orthodox Church in America, that is belong to the Greek communities, are all under the ecumenical patriarch. Saints Peter and Paul is under the ecumenical patriarch. He is our patriarch. So because I think he's right, and because he's my patriarch, I will affirm that, I believe that the ecumenical patriarch acted properly and appropriately. Not that anybody cares what I say, but ultimately, I think that, the Patriarchate of Russia kind of used a nuclear option here. Churches have gone through, Orthodox church communities have gone through disagreements, lots and lots. It's human nature. It's because, even though the church is perfect, we people in it are not perfect and fall short. But you don't break communion. That's
And then the US comes from the Constantinople, is that?
So it does, but in a really interesting way, which we are gonna find
Okay.
out. Okay. So you gotta back it up because the whole reason we have so many ethnic churches, okay, and all of them here actually was driven by what happened to the Orthodox communities under Ottoman rule. And what you see here is a map. At one point, the Ottoman Empire, which was the darker pink, extended far east and all the way out to the west, but essentially all the Orthodox churches, all those communities, all those Orthodox Christians, except for the ones in Russia, were under the oppression of Ottoman rule. And the Ottomans had a specific program as to how they incorporated Christians. They put them into something called the Millet system. It was a legal structure that governed confessional people. So there was a Jewish one, and there was the Armenian Orthodox one, because they were by now, we had split. So they were not the same faith community as what we call the Eastern Orthodox or the Orthodox. Those communities had specific legal structures that gave them the ability to not be eliminated, okay, but still restricted their movements. And some of the things that they had to do, for example, is they had to pay a head tax, and they had to wear specific clothing. They were not allowed to, in courts of the Ottomans, they did not have legal status, so that you needed like 3 Christian witnesses to 1 Muslim, and a lot of other rules, right? And as a group of people, a confessional group, so you were split up according to your religious identity, and they put in place a head of that religious identity, of that religious community, called the ethnarch. And he was the head of the ethnos, the community that had obviously the English word ethnic comes from it, had a cultural and religious identity. Those were fused. The ethnarch was the head of the church and the head of this political community within the larger Ottoman Empire community. Well, that meant the ethnarch was responsible for all of what his people are doing, and then he would report to the caliph. Okay. That meant that the people, the church leaders now had to collect taxes, had to ensure compliance to the Muslim law. They were allowed to set up their own court systems to deal with just their internal Christian community, but that led to, of course, bribery and, sort of just all the things that come with politics began to infest the religious community structure. In addition, the ethnarch could only receive his authority to rule his people, even as a religious leader, from the Ottoman Caliph. So the patriarch could not be patriarch unless the Caliph approved and invested him with the signs of his office. Okay. And should the Caliph choose to, he could depose him and put someone else in. And he did choose to frequently. The other thing is that there was always a monetary tax involved in establishing a new ethnarch. So it was paid. As you can imagine, this led to, just horrendous stuff happening. But there were some positives. The ethnic and religious community remained intact, was not assimilated into the wider Ottoman Empire. There was no interest of the Ottomans in assimilating them. They just wanted to control them, and so they used methods to keep them suppressed, but they maintained their language, they maintained their faith, they maintained their own law courts, their own schools, usually in a hidden manner. They couldn't do religious schools. By the way, there are lots of rules. For example, as a church deteriorated, they were not allowed to build new churches without a permit. They didn't get the permits, the churches would deteriorate, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. By the way, the current ecumenical patriarch is not allowed to rule without permission from the Turkish government. It still has been maintained within that, community. Okay. So there were benefits. And the reason I'm saying that is that people see the Orthodox churches as very ethnic. Well, guess what? It was created through a system that you keep your language, you keep your faith, you keep your ethnic identity, you keep your orthodoxy. They're interwoven for hundreds of years. And it worked. Orthodox faith, was maintained over hundreds of years of oppression, where every advantage, economic, political, and sometimes even your life, was to convert to Islam. Okay. So there was incredible, relentless pressure to convert. But the system, and it's almost like they didn't realize it worked against them, but it did ultimately. And of course, God is active, right? The Lord preserved the church through all of these hundreds of years. If I'm somewhat, passionate about it, it's because my mother's family came from what is today Turkey. My grandmother was born in Constantinople before it even became Istanbul, and I have a lot of connections there. I had a great uncle who was metropolitan at the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So it's still very real to a lot of us. Okay. As the Ottoman Empire broke up, you see the beginning of the national churches across the Balkan areas, because the region that's today known as Greece, it gains its independence, but their religious head was the ecumenical patriarch. So what are you going to do? He's under the Ottoman Turks. He can't lead you effectively. So they established the church in Greece, the Autocephalous Church of Greece. Notice it was declared in 1833. It wasn't officially recognized by the ecumenical patriarch until 1850. That's when it gained canonical status. And this happened through all of these regions had been under Ottoman rule, and they emerged now as autocephalous churches. Some of them, like Serbia, had been autocephalous before Ottoman rule came in. They had been an independent autocephalous church. Ottoman rule had wiped that out and they had to reestablish, but they didn't need the being officially recognized. Georgia, Albania, these are very complicated other issues that I can't really get into. So you have now, this is the old world map where all of the people from America are going to come from, except for, of course, there is a community still in Russia that was not under Ottoman rule. But all of the other Orthodox that are going to come to America have come from these places, and now they have this very tight ethnic identity woven into their Orthodoxy. All right. So that's some of the background. Now, what makes the Orthodox Church in America unique, unlike Australia, for example, or even South America, is there are actually two very important pathways that came, not just immigration. You know, we all know about immigration, but there was another pathway. It came through Russian explorers that came across Russia, over the Bering Straits, into the New World, from Alaska, down the coast, and across the nation. At the same, well, not at the same time, about 100 years later, the massive flow of immigrants from the east side, you know, not from the west part of the country, but from the east, right? We're coming in from the Atlantic Ocean and they're sailing across and beginning to move along. So these two paths were independent, but they crossed. They intersected about the mid-19th century and really at the beginning of the 20th century. All right. In the meantime, though, let's not pretend Russia didn't have things going on. And even though they had sent missionaries, that everything that's going to happen in Russia is going to impact the way the Russian Orthodox Church could operate here in the US. And again, change the landscape in America. So here's a nice little map of how the immigrants are coming in from to the New World from the east, right? And that really gets moving in the late 19th century. We have things that happened before that. So yes, there was a little colony in Florida of Greeks. You know, people like to talk about these things, but nothing really came of it. Okay. But on the other side, from the west, you see the Russian missionaries first bring the Orthodox faith to the native peoples. And so this is through evangelization. The other one, the Orthodox people are bringing it on their backs. They're bringing it, they're importing the faith with them. But this from Russia is real evangelization. And let me tell you what they did, because it's still, I mean, it is a miracle what they did. 8 monks basically walked or on donkeys because they didn't have cars, and they certainly weren't wealthy enough for carriages, okay? Traveled 7,327 miles because they didn't come from the end that's right close to the closest spot. They came from Valam, which is quite a bit at a distance. It took them 293 days or more to arrive at the place where they settled their first mission in Kodiak Island. And they began to bring Orthodoxy to the Alaskan territories. At that time, it was under Russian control because Russia had sent in naval ships, and there were a lot of people who were, animal, what is that? Getting skins, traders, not traders. When you catch animals and you're getting their skins and you're
Trappers? No, I don't know.
they're not planting farms. They're okay, guys. We'll just move on. They were the guys that come in and they're getting skins for animals to trade and to sell. Okay. But they're meeting Native women and they're getting them and they want to marry them. And in the meantime, Russian explorers are beginning to map the coast. And unfortunately, the Russian authorities at that time were very cruel. They treated the native populations terribly. And when the monks saw what was going on, they were furious. They tried to intervene. They realized they had almost no authority. So a variety of things were happening. There was a particular martyrdom of Juvenal in Alaska, but it was kind of a miscommunication with the natives, but he was killed. But the head of the mission, his name was Yosef. In 1799, he went back to Russia. He was consecrated as a bishop and given authority to dictate to the sailors and to the authorities, the maritime authorities, how to behave, and he had more authority, except that he and several others died in shipwreck upon return. So the situation continued to be problematic. The one monk who stayed and really began to draw people to himself because of his holiness is Saint Herman. Today is Saint Herman of Alaska. He continued in the mission and he spent his last years in seclusion on Spruce Island, which is a pilgrimage site today for people. And he was very beloved. But really, what drove the mission to its real success was this man. His name, he came as a priest, a married priest initially with children. His wife does pass, and there was one of the, I think it was a cousin or an aunt or something, ended up helping to raise his children. But he came as Father John Vanyaminov, and he learned the Aleut language. He began to translate the materials, and the man was indefatigable. Okay, you could not stop him. He would take canoes and go through, seas that were almost impassable, freezing weather, snowstorms. Just nothing stopped him. And he went from island to island, baptizing people, marrying people, preaching, offering sacraments, and providing prayer books in the native Aleut language. In addition, around 1825, the first native priest was ordained, which is remarkable. But in order for the faith to really take root and be considered ultimately a church in that place and not just a mission, you need native clergy. So we have, people who are born and raised there, right? And so you have the first one, Jacob Netzvetov. And then Father John's wife passed, and they determined to raise him as a bishop. So they ordained him as a bishop, and he took the name Innocent. And he is now known to us as Saint Innocent of Alaska. He was not ordained in America, though. At this point, all the ordinations are occurring in Russia, because in order to do an ordination, you need 3 bishops, so you don't have the clergy necessary. So you had to go back to Russia to be ordained. And ultimately, he stays for several decades, but in 1868, he returns to Russia, and he becomes the Metropolitan of Moscow. What's interesting about that is at this point in time in Russia, the Patriarchate had been abolished for about 200 years. It does not get reestablished until on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So the Metropolitan of Moscow is essentially the Patriarch of Russia. So St. Innocent of Alaska goes back and is elevated to that position. Interestingly enough, it happens again in the early 20th century, where Tikhon, a bishop here in America, goes back to Russia, becomes, in fact, Patriarch Tikhon. And we'll meet him soon. But it also happens that a couple of the Greek archbishops are elevated to the position of ecumenical patriarch. So there's something kind of special, I guess, about serving in America. But in any case, it led to some interesting things, connections. All right. Lots of good things. And I just wanted to show you all of this stuff is happening. Now, remember, this is way on the West Coast. The East Coast knows nothing about it. As far as people in Massachusetts and Louisiana and where other churches are beginning to be established, they don't know that there's any Orthodox Christians at all in America. There's just no communication. So we have a mission school established. We have an actual seminary established in Sitka, Alaska. We have the consecration of St. Michael's Cathedral, which is still here. And we'll see a picture in a minute what it looks like. We have the first Russian parish established in 1868 in San Francisco. And that today is the Holy Trinity Ostiate Cathedral. That was established in 1868. As I said, in 1868, also Innocent went back to Russian, was consecrated as metropolitan. And in 1870, the first Orthodox diocese in the New World was established. It was called the Diocese of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. It was formed by the Church of Russia, and Bishop John Metropolsky was the ruling hierarch at that point. So only Orthodox diocese in all of the New World. Okay. And here are some cool old pictures from there. Russian Orthodox priest with a native congregation in Seal Islands, Alaska. Russian priest with chiefs and headmen of the Thringlets in Sitka, Alaska. St. Michael's Cathedral, as I mentioned, but now also not just in 1887, but today. And by the time Alaska became part of the American territories and was no longer under Russia, it had grown to 12,000 native Christians, 9 parishes, 35 chapels, 17 schools, and 4 orphanages. All right. Here is a church out in the midst of like nowhere, an Orthodox wedding party on St. Paul Island. And so that's the Alaska stuff. And now we're going to move to what else is happening all the way on the other side of the country. All right. Okay. The second path for the Orthodox Church in America is, of course, immigration. And yes, between 1870 and 1910, more than 25 million immigrants arrived, and lots of them were from Orthodox countries. We have here the first Orthodox church, apart from what was going on in Alaska. Now, this is in New Orleans. It's called Holy Trinity. It is under the Greek Orthodox. It was originally established as just Orthodox, so every Orthodox person was welcome. It was not established in 1911. That's the picture. It was established. Did I write down the date? I didn't write down the date. It was established before that. This picture is from 1911. There's a bit of a dispute, okay, because you get to the Greeks in New York, they're like, no, we're first. The Greeks in Chicago are like, no, we're first. But probably the Greek church, this church in New Orleans, is the first, probably.
Oh, wow.
So, anyway. Well, what did they do? They didn't just, when they came here, what church did they find? They found no church, right? They had no buildings. They had no priests. There were no bishops. There was no educational material. They had no vestments. They had nothing. They had zero. So the immigrants, because they're coming from home and they're writing, please send us, please send us, please send us. But the old world countries are not wealthy. And they're not funding these as mission programs. These are just immigrants coming, right? So there was no organized, let's establish churches in the New World of any kind. To be honest with you, most of them were, as I said, emerging from Ottoman rule or still under Ottoman rule, and were just putting themselves together, establishing their own seminaries for the first time, building their own buildings. So it was the immigrants who came and they raised the funds, they purchased properties, they began to build the structures for worship, and they owned the titles, they owned the properties. I'm saying all this because this is not how the church was back in the old world, right? Who owned the churches? The church owned the churches as an administrative functioning group. You don't have the parish own the church in Greece, for example. Now, maybe parishioners will raise funds and work towards, keeping it clean and changing things and all that. But, well, of course, in Greece, it's the government actually supports the church, so it's complicated. But that's the thing. Old world communities operated very differently than here in America. Here in America, it's that American thing, you got to do it yourself. And you're beginning to see an American expression of orthodoxy here in America. We take charge, do it ourselves, begin to run it. Is it Protestant? No, it comes out of the specific historical needs of the community. Yes, they wrote home begging for clergy to celebrate the sacraments. And by the way, we have a lot of evidence that the initial people, there were some who came because they had a great love and they wanted to serve these people who had nothing. But you also have bishops sending their very failed priests, the ones they want to, let's find somewhere else than here for them. Let's send them to America. So there were a lot of issues in the beginning. But they began to establish the administrative structures like parish boards and councils. They began to educate their children. We didn't have educated theologians or teachers, nothing. So they began to educate their children and ran those programs. And they included with that the study of the ethnic language and identity, Greek dance or Serbian language, because they learned that lesson, keep the language, keep the faith, right? You will remain who you are, even in this new world, if you keep your language and keep your faith. They established a number of groups to assist people in various stages of immigration, but also social need. They established the Philoptochos, which cares for the poor. But I will say all these programs were geared for the internal community. These were not social outreach to help the poor on the streets of New York, for example. It was the poor of their ethnic community that were coming in. And they began to purchase lands for cemeteries.
Hi.
Hey,
Apologies.
it must be Matthew and Timothy.
Yeah.
Okay. You mark you as present, you know you're.
I know where.
So,
Was the door propped open for you guys?
What's that?
Was the door propped open for you guys?
It was.
Okay, I
Did
stuck it on, no,
Oh,
well,
It's still,
I
we
think
had
it's,
trouble
that-
getting in. We
no one's gonna,
couldn't get in initially, so
okay.
then he left.
Put it
the
there.
door propped
Broken.
open.
no one's gonna
Well,
break in.
You're in the immigrant experience right now, so you're just gonna have to kind of jump in.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's happening, right, as the immigrants come in. But what's happening with that Russian missionary group that established the one and only Orthodox diocese in 1870? Well, in 1872, we shouldn't be up here in Alaska. We should start going where the action is. They moved down to San Francisco. And by the way, they eventually, 1905, they moved to New York. But they recognized, well, they have immigrants coming in from New York, but they needed to, in some way, minister to the larger number, and it wasn't anymore the native populations in Alaska and those that had come down to San Francisco, but really the immigrants that were coming in from the Atlantic side. All right, so this diocese is moving across. Now, as far as they're concerned, as far as this, they have a bishop, they have a structure, they have educational materials, they have a plan. And as far as they understand it, this is the Orthodox Church in America. And then now their plan is really to minister to all the Orthodox communities that are coming in. They begin to see they have to make pockets of ethnic identity within this greater Russian Orthodox diocese. Okay, and there's no other dioceses. There's no archbishops or there's no archdiocese of the Greeks or nothing. They don't exist yet. Okay, only this. They have their first what they call All-American Sober. It's like the Greeks have the Clergy Laity Congress. It's the get everybody together, get all the priests in the land together, get all the heads of the parishes together and talk. And for the first time, they don't call themselves a mission anymore. They call themselves the Russian Orthodox Greek Catholic Church in America. Catholic, by the way, like we use in the creed, meaning universal. Doesn't mean Roman Catholic. It's a Greek word and it means universal. Okay. So for the first time since, this is really unusual, since the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which was in 787, they included laymen in the decision-making process of this council. So, American expression, the take charge, the, building your own churches, holding the titles, educating your own people, but now also including the laity. I won't call it democratization because it actually existed before in the ancient tradition of the church. It just had been suppressed or died out or had been forgotten, but now the lay people participation is being included. They also prayed for the president, which is interesting. Okay. Now, this Russian Orthodox diocese is beginning to welcome other ethnic communities into its group, into its identity. One arm of that, one group of that, are something called Eastern Rite Catholics. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on this. I'll just say quickly, there was a period when in Ukraine, under Ottoman rule, the church was faced with a dire situation, and some of the communities there ended up going under Roman Catholic rule, but were allowed to maintain everything else about themselves that looks and feels and sounds Orthodox. It's just that instead of allegiance to the patriarch, their allegiance to the Pope. And I'll tell you, I was one time I had taught at Loyola University for like 12 years. I had a student who was Eastern Rite Catholic. That's what we call this, Eastern Rite Catholic. Eastern Rite meaning they have all the Eastern Orthodox like stuff. They have the icons, they have the incense, they have the vestments that look like it looks just like an Orthodox church. But I said to her, she's like, "We're Orthodox." I'm like, "Well, are you really?" I said, "Do you have a picture of the Pope in your narthex?" And she's like, "Yeah, we have a picture of the Pope." "You're Catholic, you're not Orthodox. You're not gonna have a picture of the Pope in your narthex if you're Orthodox." So under this guy, Father Alexis Toth, who immigrated to America, and the Roman Catholic Archbishop was very unwelcoming. And it came to him that it's time for this Orthodox community to go back under Orthodox rule. And he brought with him eventually something like 20,000 Eastern Rite Catholics back to Russian Orthodoxy. Okay. Besides him, though, other stuff that's happening in this diocese. Well, the Russian bishop is like, there's a lot from the Middle East here, and they speak Arabic. They're not going to feel comfortable in a Russian Orthodox church hearing Russian. So he really committed to having a community under the rule of the Russian bishop, but that was led by a Middle Eastern bishop and belonged to the Antiochian, or the community that comes out of Lebanon. So he was consecrated, first bishop actually ordained in the US. Everybody else up to this point had been ordained outside the US. First one in the US, Archimandrite Raphael Abolini, 1904, came to serve the Syrian community. I'm sorry, I said Lebanese, he's Syrian, and established all kinds of various churches, a magazine, helped to found St. Tikhon's monastery, and became the official sort of representative of ultimately what became the Antiochian archdiocese, but still only under the Russians. I'm going to finish this part and then we'll take our break. But the Serbs, similarly, now there's no Serbian diocese, right? But there are Serbian people. They need to be ministered to. Their language, they do use Church Slavonic, but there are some differences, and they certainly have their own ethnic identity and community. So lifted up to serve them was Saint Sebastian of San Francisco and Jackson. And he is also under the diocese run by the Russians. And the figure that came to take control in the early 20th century was Archbishop Tikhon. He was transferred to New York. And yes, indeed, he's the one, the second one. Like I told you, the first one was Innocent. He became the Patriarch of Moscow. Tikhon ultimately does go back to Russia and is elevated to become the first patriarch of Russia after the patriarchate had been abolished in Russia for hundreds of years. He was established. However, it was on the eve of the Bolshevik Revolution. The revolution occurred. At one point, he was imprisoned for a very long period, and he died as a confessor to the faith under the atheist Soviets. And he is called Enlightener of North America because he had a real vision for us here. And it's beautiful to see. He wrote this in 1905, all right? The diocese, now he means this one diocese, okay, is not only multinational, it's composed of several Orthodox churches which keep the unity of faith but preserve their peculiarities in canonical structure and liturgical roles in parish life. So he envisions one Orthodox administrative body here, but with the various communities retaining their particular liturgical roles, their way of doing stuff, right? These peculiarities, and what he means is their particular expressions. Our language changes over time. We don't use peculiar in the same way today, but back then it meant like your own special thing. Okay, these peculiarities are dear to them and can be perfectly well tolerated in the pan-Orthodox scene. We do not consider that we have the right to suppress the national character of the churches here. On the contrary, we try to preserve this character. We confer on them the latitude to be governed by leaders of their own nationality. This is visionary, guys. Okay, it's not a Greek Orthodox Church imposing Greek Orthodox on everybody. It's not a Russian Orthodox Church imposing being Russian on everybody. It's saying each group can be who they are, but we will all be one administrative body. He said, life in the New World is different from that in the Old, a greater autonomy and possibly an autocephalous Orthodox Church of America should be granted to the church in America. This is 1905. We're not there yet, guys, and it's 2026. All right. Now we enter in 759. I think we might take our break. Now, the second decade of the 20th century is when huge changes. Okay, it starts with 19. You know what? I'm going to do this slide, and then I'm going to get to the big change. Of course, is the Bolshevik Revolution. But initially, in the early 20th century, the Greeks had been under the ecumenical patriarch because the ecumenical patriarch basically governs every territory that doesn't have its own church. It's one of those canonical things. Technically, the canon says the ecumenical patriarch governs those in barbarian lands. It literally says barbarian lands. And New World was a barbarian land, essentially. So there was no church here. At least they didn't know there was a church here. All right, I told you the one from Russia wasn't recognized. They didn't know it was here. But in 1908, he, because of political issues in Constantinople, put them under the Church of Greece. So for about, I don't know, 12 years, we were not under the ecumenical patriarch. We are under the Church of Greece. But that changes again. All right. And then stuff is getting established in America that's Greek Orthodox, but where do they fit? They're going back to people in Greece to govern, right? Albanians established a parish in Boston, but they don't know about this Russian group. So they're going back to Albania. Serbians, at this point, they were under the Russians, but they petitioned to go under the Serbian Patriarch. Some did, some did not. And then you have, again, the Arabs. They were under this Russian diocese, but some of them said, you know what, we really want the Russians, our own Arab leadership. So let's ask if we can go under that. Some of them moved. We don't know what would have happened if that Russian diocese could stay intact. But revolution, right? What happened in Russia forever changed what happened here with regard to the establishment of that one Russian diocese, which was on its way to becoming one Orthodox church in America. So let's pause here, take a 5-minute break, and come on back. Okay. All right, and guys, now I've told you before, if you need to unmute and say something, you do that, okay? But we're gonna take a 5-minute break. All right, I'll be back in a few minutes.
Look at the pictures.
She's smiling there.
Mhm.
Oh. Okay. We can get started there. The sooner we get started, the sooner we're done, right? Okay. All right, we're back. So don't get scared. I'm not going to read all these things, okay? I'm really gonna highlight the red, the first one too. I didn't read it, but it's the first one. All right, the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917 to 1923, but that's the turbulent period. After that, it was just relentless militant atheism against orthodoxy. And I cannot tell you the thousands of priests and bishops who lost their lives, the thousands of monks, the millions of Orthodox faithful who died, the many saints and from the martyrs at that period of time. It was really, you know, cataclysmic. But what happened here is that the Russian Orthodox diocese, the one diocese that was really up and running and functioning here, was completely cut off and had no support, no governance, and no financial assistance. And in fact, its main leadership had been transferred back to Russia. There were people here who were just floundering, and it essentially ceased to function effectively. And then the Russian communities, because of what happened in Russia, broke into 4 factions. In 1921, that's the first red light thing, because I'm going to try to highlight the ones that are most operative in America today. A group known as the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. Sometimes it's called the Synod Church because they met in Synod in Karlovsky, Serbia. They broke from Moscow because the leadership in Moscow they felt had been too compromised by the Soviet rule or inaccessible. So they essentially chose to operate independently until they could establish real communion with that hierarchy again. They did ultimately reestablish communion with the hierarchy in Moscow in the early 20th century, early 21st century, like in 2404 or something like that. So a long time, decades and decades and decades. The Russian church outside of Russia operated independently. It takes an acronym, ROCOR. ROCOR was not officially recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarch, and we, as Greeks, we had basically no interaction with them over many decades, but now we do. They tend to run very conservative in teaching and doctrine and such, but there's some real fruitful interaction. In this vacuum, you see the founding of Orthodox diocese, and then ultimately they become archdioceses in the US, governed from afar. Okay, so the headship is from afar, but they have, the patriarch sends the bishop here, or the metropolitan elsewhere sends bishops to govern here. America, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America was founded in 1922. Another offshoot from the Russians, now the two important ones were Rokor and this one. The group came to be known first as the Metropolia and then the OCA. That's the more direct descendant from this Russian mission that started with the missionaries, came over into Alaska, built the diocese here, came from San Francisco, Alaska to San Francisco to New York. That's the Metropolia. And they ultimately became OCA because in 1970, they petitioned for autocephaly from the Moscow Patriarch and were granted it. They chose the name Orthodox Church in America, and they are a functioning autocephalous church in America. They don't get any, they don't have any authoritative input from abroad. That has changed in some ways to be a lot of influence, but I'm not here to talk politics. Okay, we are not going to tread into that. And besides, it's on YouTube, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. All right, we're just going to go with history right now. All right, we have some of the other dioceses established: the Serbians in 26, the Ukrainians in 28. Okay, this is really the beginning of jurisdictional identity in America. Before, there was one diocese. Now, once that collapsed, you have multiple dioceses, multiple Orthodox churches that are beginning to do their own thing. They don't communicate. You can go, I grew up my entire life until I went to seminary in my 20s. I had never stepped in another Orthodox church, and that was definitely the case, apart from a Greek Orthodox church. Never gone to, and still to this day, there are Orthodox Christians who have never stepped inside of other Orthodox jurisdictional things. I teach at a Serbian Orthodox church, so of course I've gone to several other ones now, but that's, so just to show you some of the slides from those communities being established, this is the very first Serbian bishop. He is now been canonized. He lived and reposed in Libertyville, Illinois. That's where his relics are. It's a short jaunt up the 294 if you want to worship the relics of an Orthodox saint, Saint Medallia of Libertyville in Chicago. All right. And here's him in front of one of the churches he established. That's the church where his relics are right now, St. Saba in Libertyville. And here they are setting up the property. They're consecrating the property at the monastery where that church sits. It's a big, big property up there. And I'm not going to go through this. This tells you the history of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. Were we to really want to get into the details of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, we can go through this, but I don't think that's going to be really helpful. So we can just move along. One thing I will note is in 22, remember I told you in 1908, the church here was under the Metropolitan of Athens. Well, in 22, it came back under the Ecumenical Patriarch. And this guy is Archbishop in America and ultimately becomes Patriarch in Constantinople. So this is Athenagoras, really remarkable person. He worked there had been a big fracture in the Greek community based on a civil war back in Greece between the royalists and the Venizelos, who were the political leader. And that fracture led to fracture of the community in Greece. Guess what? That's happened to every one of the ethnic churches here. The Serbs fractured because of stuff going on in Serbia. The Ukrainians fractured. I think there's 4 of them because of what has happened in Ukraine. I've already shown you that the Russians fractured into 4 with 2 big groups. It's true for the Albanians, true for the However, the Greeks reunited. The Serbs got it back together again and buried the hatchet and became one community again. So, and this guy, Athenagoras, was instrumental in helping that church to heal. He also very famously met with Pope Paul and began the sort of rapprochement between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics. Other stuff is happening that's kind of good for the Orthodox here in America. And I just put in red the founding of these seminaries, Holy Cross in 37. That's where the Greek Orthodox priests and seminarians and teachers, that's where I got one of my degrees. St. Vladimir's, that's the Russian one. And ultimately now it's OCA. There's St. Tikhon, which is also under the Russian Metropolitan, but also Rokhor there too. And stuff is happening with these other jurisdictions, but that's the thing. It's jurisdictional. We haven't really overcome our divisions. That thrust to be one church with sort of various ways of expressing that, which was the vision of Bishop Tikhon, who became Patriarch Tikhon, was ruptured, was lost. And now came these little pockets of churches that didn't talk to each other and didn't work together, right? But they didn't last. Things have changed. Okay. So here are some pictures of the seminaries. St. Tikhon's on the left, St. Vladimir's in the middle, Holy Cross on the right. This is the period known as the diaspora mindset. This period from about 1920 up until about 1990. The idea of the diaspora is that you are still, you're the part of the far-flung children from, cast from the homeland. And you always yearn for that homeland. I mean, I remember one of the former metropolitans who's reposed now in Chicago telling us that our children, they need to go back and breathe the air of Greece because, that's the air of their homeland. And I'm like, I was born here. My parents were born here. My children are born here. I celebrate the 4th of July. I mean, Greek Independence Day is great, but I celebrate the 4th of July. Now, I married a Greek immigrant, so that got complicated, It's kind of gone back to different. But the thing is that diaspora mindset operated, but kind of pushing against that is the being established and settled and becoming truly American. And it's complicated, right? And Saints Peter and Paul, by the way, was founded by people like my parents, because my parents were founding members here, who were born here and whose children were born here. So it is truly one of our most American of Greek Orthodox parishes. But you see the variation as you go across the Greek communities in just the Chicagoland area, right? So what you have here is this diaspora mindset that we're daughter churches, and the mother churches have had a lot of trouble shifting from that diaspora mindset, that we are their daughters. We're not ready yet. We're not ready yet to be our own people and to run things on our own. And let's face it, the mother churches have become vulnerable in many ways and need their children for financial and political support. It shouldn't be an either or. It shouldn't be either you're with the mother church and support it, or you're on your own and you don't support her. We can do both. We can both be in a community and still support the churches that we came from. And that's, I think, the way it will be resolved. A shift occurred in the late 1990s and in the beginning of the 2000s, where the mother churches began to say, maybe it's time. And by 2015, the church here in America has been given the green light to plan a roadmap towards Orthodox unity. Okay, not that we're there yet, obviously, but to begin to see, so things started to happen though, organically to prepare the mother churches for this shift. What began to happen? This is more of the diaspora mindset. Let's go over here. All right. Here I was just saying the pluses and minuses of that diaspora mindset or the preservation of ethnic identity with Orthodox faith. So let's remember there's good stuff that goes with it. It served the Orthodox churches very well under Turkish domination. And for us here, it enabled the church to and the communities to assist in identity and, you know, not feeling lost in this big melting pot, if you will. But the negatives for the church here. We are not working together. Didn't have a real mindset for mission. Now you guys are coming at a place in time where that mindset is changing. We are gearing up for mission, for spreading a word of who we are. But there was a long time when people are like, if you're interested, you can come. It's not our job to reach out to you. You know, we have to take care of ourselves and make sure we're doing fine. And there was no outreach for decades, for decades and decades, but it began to change. And do we belong in this culture? Do we have anything to say? Are we going to become politically active? We were really the no-shows until the late 20th century, we started to show up. And how did we start to show up? We begin to, first of all, in 1960, the founding of the Standing Conference of Canonical Orthodox Bishops in America. We decide we're going to get us all together and they're going to talk to each other. All the bishops are going to talk to each other and going to work on doing something together. We see in it says here, the North American Orthodox Catholic Theological Consultation was formed. We're beginning to talk to the Catholics here and to the other Christians here. Archbishop Jacobus marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the Selma to Montgomery marches. I'll show you a picture in a minute. We take a notice of what's happening in the world around us and begin to participate. Even so, however, immigration keeps happening, which affects things. So here's Jacobus marching with Martin Luther King Jr. Made it to the cover of Life magazine. My husband actually has that cover, that copy of Life magazine. You see a picture of the very first SCOBA meeting, the Standing Conference of Canonical Orthodox Bishops. Its name has changed today. Now they are called the Assembly of Orthodox Canonical Bishops in America, for short, the Assembly of Bishops. And over there, Orthodox Christians for Life. So we're beginning to take part of in the larger landscape of American life. That's preparing the churches abroad for seeing that we are not just a diaspora, not just longing to return home, but we're living here. We're committed, right? We're building a world here. I told you in 1970, the Russian Metropolia reconciled with the Patriarchate of Moscow. They became OCA, first church that's autocephalous in the US. Okay. Other stuff happening. Besides beginning to talk to each other, we're actually doing things together. And here are these great pan-Orthodox programs and associations. We have Orthodox Christian Fellowship, all Orthodox Christians together. We have the founding of the Orthodox Christian Mission Center, pan-Orthodox. We have the International Orthodox Christian Charities, IOCC. Excellent, excellent group. Totally recommend sending your money there if you want to support a charitable group. They do phenomenal work and they give like everything to the charity, to the poor, to the needy, to the people who are needy. We have the first meeting of the canonical bishops to talk about getting rid of this term diaspora and work toward unity. And then we have, I said 2015, actually 2010, the Episcopal Assembly has been renamed and is set toward the goal of administrative unity. And here are us working together. So over here we have actually all of these as IOCC on the left and on the right, that's the Mission Center work. And this is all through Pan-Orthodox cooperation here in America. What else do we have? We have a Pan-Orthodox Orthodox Theological Society of America. We have the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. By the way, the president of that is Rand Anderson, who is one of St. Peter and Paul members. Okay. And I've been on the board of OTSA for many years myself. We have Orthodox Christian laity. We have the Orthodox Christian prison ministry. We have other things, Orthodox Christian Network for Life, Zoe for Life, and Project Mexico and the St. Innocent Orphanage. These are all joint Orthodox activities. And here you see on the left, that's Ocamper meeting right here at St. Peter and Paul. That's the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion. So it brings doctors who are Orthodox together with therapists, together with theologians, together with scientists who are Orthodox, but mostly people in the healing professions.
When you say pan, do you mean all the different Orthodox, like Russian,
Yep.
Serbian? Okay.
That's exactly what I mean.
Okay.
And in fact, these associations fold into them now, some with more, they're more active than others, but the Coptic Orthodox as well. So currently the Armenian, the Egyptian, the Coptic, did I say Coptic? Yes. What I meant to say was the Oriental Orthodox. That includes the Armenian, the Coptic, the Ethiopian, and a couple of others are not in communion with us. But we do include them in many of these joint activities. So that's Project Mexico, Prison Ministry, OTSA, the Orthodox Theological Association. All right. We are trying to move from this jurisdictional, like ghettos, if you will, where we're all sort of isolated, to a real, like, unified Orthodox Church in America. Because to be honest with you, that's the canonically appropriate. In other words, in the rule book of the Orthodox Church, that's how it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to have lots of little different churches that sort of all get together and get along with each other. You're one church, so you're supposed to be one Orthodox church in Greece, one Orthodox church in Albania, one Orthodox church in Yugoslavia, one Orthodox church in Venezuela. I mean, honestly, you could even drop Orthodox. It's the church here, the church there, the church where she is, right? So it should be the church in America. But when you start adding in all of the little identities, you begin to build walls and fracture. And you don't have the ability to communicate, you don't have the ability to embrace. Now, within that larger body, you should have, just like America, you have regions, right? We all know Southerners are different than those in the Southwest. Okay, food's different, they speak a little differently, they're all wonderful, but we all have our sort of regional differences and expressions. It can be one country. We can be one church with our, as St. Tikhon said, our peculiarities, okay? All right. So what is the challenge here? Okay, and I just threw it out there. One of the biggest challenges we have is when our patriarchs are fighting, right? So as they say, when the elephants are fighting, the mice get trampled, right? So we got to get that settled in a way. What kind of relationship will we have with the mother churches? How do we preserve the special ethnic identities and expressions? Nobody wants to get rid of Greek dance, okay? I mean, it's too much fun. But that shouldn't stand in the way of us being a unified Orthodox church that has administrative unity. We have something called the differences in the calendar. Should you be energetic enough to want to get into the calendar, we can tackle that, but we'll leave that to the end, okay? But that is one of the challenges that we have to resolve, our different calendars. In case you don't know, okay, all Orthodox Christians share the same calendar for Pascha. So we're all going to have Easter on the same day, and any of what we call the movable feasts. A movable feast is that which is connected to Pascha, so it moves every year, because Pascha moves every year. So what would that be? The Ascension, because that's dated 40 days after Pascha,
Passover.
and Pentecost, which is 50 days after, right? So those are movable feasts. What are fixed feasts? Same date every year, Christmas, December 25th, every year. The Annunciation, March 25th. The falling asleep of the Mother of God, April 15th. Okay, fixed feasts. We don't share the same date for fixed feasts all across the Orthodox churches in America. We have some that are following old calendar and some that are following new calendar. Old calendar happens 13 days after. Okay, so it'll be feast. They haven't had the Feast of the Annunciation yet in the old calendar. We did it, what was it, last Wednesday. Right. So they're waiting 13 days from that. It's gonna be in Holy Week. It's gonna be in Holy Week for them. All right. That's a hurdle. Right? That's a hurdle. It's a hurdle right now for us, much less it will be one. And then we actually have some differences in how we welcome converts, how we treat people in mixed marriages, how we deal with confession. We have a few differences in fasting. These are things that have to be discussed and sort of worked out or something. Okay. But why do we want it? What's so good about it? Well, you share resources. We can begin to speak with one voice and have a much greater presence in the community here. It follows the canons more properly. We can do effective mission better if we are really one church, because let's face it, people who are coming to Orthodoxy, they're like, wait a minute. If I become Greek, if I enter into the Greek Orthodox Church, am I Russian Orthodox too? Or do I have to do a second one to get into I mean, it's just a lot of confusion. And we can maybe move toward actually expressing Orthodoxy in the language and culture of the people here, which is more and more pressing when you have people who are born here becoming Orthodox, or people who are Orthodox who are being born here. So, and don't necessarily know the languages of the old world churches. What can it look like? And so I have a few pictures showing the variations of communities and variation of worship spaces across America. We see new different ethnicities becoming part of our family. We see people of all kinds being welcome. So I have here the Romanian church in California, the OCA church in Maryland. I think the one before was, and I think that there was from the upper Northwest, and that's an OCA church. And then, of course, I have Saints Peter and Paul and Metropolitan Nathaniel, when he came to bless, and he has the children all around, blessing them. And really the question then is, what are we building? What are we holding onto and handing over to the next generation as we welcome the children? And this is an aerial photograph of Pascha night over St. Haralambos in Niles. What they do there is the priest comes out to the steps at the top of the church. It's like a little landing. And there are people in the church, but the Anastasy or the resurrection part of the service is held outside because lots and lots of people come and they can't all fit in the church. Now, the people in the church technically are supposed to exit out and participate in the beginning. They usually don't because they lose their seat. Okay, it's just the hard facts of it. But the cool thing about this is that you get to see Niles lit up with lights of the resurrection and people singing the Christ is risen hymn. And St. Haralambos also sets off fireworks at the end of this, which is very Greek. If you go to Athens, you'll see lots of fireworks on Pascha night. But this photograph, because it really shows mission, like the church moving out and bringing the light of Christ to the next generation, the children, but also out to America, becoming the light of the world to the place where we live. So
Where is this church? Your voice just cut out.
oh, okay. This is St. Haralambos in Niles, in Illinois. I mean, it's just down the road from us,
Okay.
actually. I don't know if you're in the Chicagoland area, if you're
No,
elsewhere.
Wisconsin,
Okay, all right.
Madison. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, it's in the Chicagoland area here. So, all right. So that is it. I'll go back to that photo to land on. But actually, I should probably stop the share so I can look at you guys and answer questions. We ended up at 8:37. I found in the past that I get a little bit into the weeds of the history too much and eyes glaze over. So that's why I kind of went through some of the slides that had a lot of detail on them fast. But it wasn't really, it's not like I don't even remember this stuff. So, all of the details. So I didn't think that was important. So I really want to focus on things that are your questions that you might have with regard to anything that you have encountered before or today, since this is your last session. So
It's
you can answer questions.
Is the Greek Orthodox Church the biggest of all Orthodox churches?
We are definitely the elephant in the room. We are the most numerous. And in many ways, you have to get the Greeks on board. But the reality is the Greeks are also I think the ones most willing to listen. Because we are large, we also have a wide range of attitudes, ideas, perspectives. People, our monastic communities range from one to the next. I think there's a lot of depth there. So, but I will say that probably the most dynamic of the Orthodox communities right now in terms of bringing new converts in is happening through the Antiochians and the OCA. And you can say, why the Antiochians? Because they are, they started out very ethnic. Well, there was a time when back in, I'm pretty sure it was the 80s, it might have been the 90s. There was a group known as, initially as the evangelical. It was a bunch of evangelical Christians that had started a group called Campus Crusade, and their very much Protestant, very much evangelicals, very much preaching, Jesus. But they developed a deep desire to discover the original authentic church. And they started to research it, right? And the deeper they went, the more they came to the realization that that's the Orthodox Church. That's the Orthodox Church. And they began to seek audience with Orthodox hierarchs to enter. And they wanted to enter as a group. Now, they had already ordained their own priests and bishops. They went from being evangelical without any of that structure to, reading the New Testament, to reading the early Christian stuff, saying, they had bishops, so we should have bishops. So they were doing their own bishops, but none of that is canonical, right? So they approached the ecumenical patriarch. They approached the OCA. They approached a variety, and they were basically told, you are welcome to enter as individuals. That is, go through catechism and come as individuals, but not as a church group. And there were a few thousand of them, and they wanted to come in together. And the Antiochian hierarch at that time, and I'm pretty sure his name was Philip. I think it was Philip. Forgive me. I knew this so well, but I didn't review it before I came, and now it's been a few years since I've been pretty sure it was Philip. Did say yes. And there is a beautiful video of some 3,000 being chrismated into the Orthodox Church en masse, okay, as a group. And then their priests had to go through seminary and had to be ordained properly. None of them retained being bishops. But some of the most extraordinary Orthodox leaders, and I'm remembering Father Peter Gilchrist, who came to speak at St. Peter and Paul several times. Our former priest who's reposed now, Father George Koulis, knew Father Gilchrist well, and he came to speak here often. Truly an extraordinary man, and they all converts, and they started in the Antiochian Archdiocese, and they are the ones who were, they're Protestants. So what do they want? They wanted a good Orthodox study Bible. So guess what? They were the impetus behind the Orthodox study Bible.
Interesting.
They're the ones that started to really get Orthodox materials out there and look towards mission. And it is through that initiative that the Antiochian Archdiocese is one of the mission parishes. Mission jurisdictions with many mission parishes. Not from something the Antiochian Archdiocese hierarchy chose to do, but through the vision of the one hierarch and the effort and commitment of these faithful Christians who ended up becoming really extraordinary Orthodox leaders. So, yeah, if you can Google, I guess, Orthodox Church welcomes evangelical Orthodox or something like that. See if you can find the video. So,
Dr. Helen,
yeah.
I heard somebody said that Yakovos said before he died that was the biggest mistake he ever made, was not accepting them into the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. We had in San Diego, where I moved from, we had Father John Braun, and actually a couple of my cousins left the Greek Orthodox Church and went to the Antiochian Church because it was much more mission oriented, and coming from a Protestant background, really more American, more relatable to. So anyway, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, Cindy, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's actually very perceptive about, how even Yakovos, who, by the way, the one she's talking about, Yakovos, he's the one who walked with Martin Luther King Jr. That's the guy. And he was an extraordinary leader, just incredibly charismatic and just had a huge following in America. Had he wanted to say, you know what, I'm going to be Patriot of America, I bet you he would have had a whole bunch of people follow him to that. But he was not, it was not in his, he was a very obedient to the church. And there's stuff that went down. He ended up actually having to resign, step down. And it led to a lot of turmoil in the Greek community because of that. But he was just a remarkable figure, and for him to recognize that shows his humility.
Mhm.
Recognize the mistake, but it also shows how valued that group became within the life of the Orthodox, the wider Orthodox Church. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Around what time did this happen with the campus crusade?
I'm
or
thinking it was the 80s.
80s?
Yeah, yeah, mid-80s. They met, I forget if it was 5 or 7 of them, and they were all leaders from the leading evangelical, like Campus Crusade for Christ, but also the Navigators. One of them was the leader of the Navigators, which is a church without walls. And they met once a year for I don't know how many years, and they would assign, okay, this year you're gonna spend studying like bishops, like Dr. Helen brought up, or whatever, and then they would reconvene each year and say, what did you find? What did you find? And they ultimately decided the Orthodox Church was the church because they were in universities and in communities, but then they would bring people into the Christian faith, but then not have a church for them to carry on with, these college kids. And so, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. One of the books recommended on our reading list for this course is Father Gilchrist's book.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
big
Well,
time.
that's it. It has one of the.
It's a great story. I read it.
Yeah.
Becoming Orthodox.
Mhm.
Yeah. Right, yes. And I mean, I met him several times. He was a lovely person. He passed from cancer a little bit too soon from this world. But and I think his son is an Orthodox priest now. I could be wrong, but anyway. So all right, other questions or comments or
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned that the immigrants who were coming over from Greece and other countries were founding Orthodox in America. They did it by themselves, right? There was no funding. And they were going back to their homeland, trying to get materials
Yeah.
and whatnot. And I'm trying to understand how we are as a Christian society populate the way that we are, right? Because I'm Roman Catholic converting to Orthodox, and I see that in America it's primarily Roman Catholic. And I'm trying to look back at like the history of like how did that happen? Because it's like I know that um there were other outside factors that influenced Orthodoxy to stay suppressed, right? So the suppression of Orthodoxy. So in this example, would you say that Catholicism really expanded in North America because there was more funding involved? Do you think that played
Well,
a part?
okay, so you go back to the initial incredibly tiny minority initially. It was Protestant. This nation was Protestant. It was Calvinist, the Puritans. It was Reformed. It was some from the Church of England, like Virginia, but it was solidly Protestant. And initially, the Roman Catholics had to carve out a little space for themselves where they weren't persecuted. And actually Maryland, because Baltimore was bequested from I'm trying to remember who gave it to Lord Baltimore, but it became Maryland and Baltimore, that area became like havens for Catholics. And if you go to the very first Toleration Act in America was the Toleration Act of Maryland, which basically said that you couldn't, that the Christians had to get along. By the way, it also required that you believe in Jesus Christ. And I mean, it was not tolerant about any other faith. Okay. You had to be Christian. You had to believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and Mary was his mother, and but Christians had to tolerate each other and not call each other papists or that now, etc. So Roman Catholicism had actually a big hurdle to overcome, but there were, I think, two major factors. Number one, just sheer numbers of immigrants. Okay, just as the Orthodox Church actually becomes what it is because of the immigration numbers that brought enough of it here to really build. Otherwise, was very tiny. It was there, but it really needed the immigration numbers to expand. But besides that, yes, the money. What you have in Roman Catholicism is you have this is where unified structure, administrative unity, actually has a lot of impact in terms of being able to build things, have a voice, have a presence, provide like sort of highways of resources. Okay, but when you have little pockets of identity that are not even communicating with each other, then everybody has to create everything for themselves in that one little space. And you're not going to be able to grow much beyond that little tiny, you can maybe take care of yourself, but you're not going to be able to do something bigger with that. Ultimately, the archdioceses that get established here begin to function a little bit more like the Catholic model in terms of taking the properties back from the parishes under a single unified structure. And now, for example, each parish has to support the archdiocese, the overarching structure. So as independent archdioceses, we're functioning more like a unified model, but we're still not speaking to each other, which basically limits our capacity to function, right? We're still not using each other's resources. The more we do that and cooperate and work together. So the Assembly of Bishops has now instituted something called an inter-parish association, which is encouraging parishes that are in different jurisdictions to work together in certain regions for certain projects. This is not so needed in the Chicagoland area, but in a place like, my kids, I have two of my three girls live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Okay, there's one Greek Orthodox church where pretty much everybody used to go if you're Orthodox. And now there's an OCA church up in the North Park. If they don't work together at all, then they have to kind of create everything for themselves. However, when, for example, the OCA church had a problem, they had to close their doors for a while, or they had to reconstruct, I can't remember if it was a flood or fire or whatever, they had to they came to the Greek church and they were welcomed. And then they could share resources. They could share there's a library. Can they share the library? Can they share teachers, for example? There aren't a whole lot of people educated at our seminaries. And, I've been asked by the Serbians to lecture at various events. And we can turn and ask an OCA person, or, that sharing of resources. So you're right in saying that funding, and it's not just the money itself, but it's the structure that the money comes with, right? That the Roman Catholic has, that is a very effective way of providing for the local communities. There's a lot to admire, actually, and learn from in terms of how the Roman Catholic Church functions. It's an effective organization, right? It has very effective, but we can learn without becoming it, you know what I'm saying? And the same thing with the Protestants. We've learned a lot about how to do outreach from Protestant communities who are so good at that. They're so good at giving sermons. We can learn a lot about how our priests can give better sermons by seeing how they do it. Why are they so good at it? Unlike us, where the center of our worship is the Eucharist, right? The center of worship in many Protestant communities is the sermon, the word. They'll do Eucharist maybe only once a month, but they'll do sermons every single time they're together. So what I'm saying is we can learn from one another without like yielding to changing doctrine and teachings. So yes, money, but more than money.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, thank you so much.
so. All right, other questions, guys? We can be done.
So the OCA is Russian and the Go Arch is the Greek one?
Yeah.
Got it. So confused.
Essentially, yes, although OCA is very American now. Their background is Russian. They've also gotten more Russified lately. So that's something we can, that's for off the internet discussion. Okay,
Thank
what
you.
that means and et cetera, so.
Well, thank you so much for the history. That was interesting.
Sure.
Thank
Well, whether it's history interesting or not, it is helpful ultimately for understanding who we are and why we are this way. So, all right, guys.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
blessed
Thank you.
and beautiful Pasta, everybody, and you as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you.
Kalo Pascha.
Nice to meet you both.
Oh, nice meeting you.
Good one. Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Take care, guys.
Have a good one.
All right, take care.
Dr. Helen,
Yeah.
Have a good one.
do you think the ecumenical patriarch is going to leave Constantinople? Or do you think?
That's a very good question. Clearly, of course, this one won't. Whether the next one will, a lot depends on the mindset of the person who occupies that throne. There are very, very important reasons to be there. Very deep attachment to miracles and events that happened there, and a history that, and a hope, of course, that, we can flourish again there, but there's also a reality that can't be ignored, and his effectiveness is it's limited, and because he cannot always travel when he wants to, and he is subject to Turkish rule, and the next ecumenical patriarch, as long as we're in Constantinople, has to be a citizen of Turkey. Did you know that? He has
Yeah,
to be
born there, which Elpidophoros was born there, right? I mean, I've heard that.
Well, you don't actually have to be born there. You have to be. And for example, Nikitas, Archbishop Nikitas.
Oh, I love him.
Well, guess what? He's a citizen of Turkey. He can
Oh,
indeed become the next patriarch.
wow.
Yep, even though he was born in America. Or maybe,
He's in London now. Is he in UK?
yep, he is, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, and he's actually taken on a lot of different responsibilities. His star has risen quite a bit. So, I would say right now, Elpidophoros and Nikitas are the two
Mhm.
most poised for taking on the mantle of ecumenical patriarch.
So either one of them, you said it depends on the mindset of the person in that position.
Yes,
What,
yes.
so say it's Nikitas or Elpidophoros, what do you think their mindset would be in terms of staying there or facing
Well,
reality?
the next question is where do you go? And because there is the ecumenical patriarchate has a center in Geneva. If
Oh,
you came to New York, then how do you think Australia will feel? Or, other
right.
places that are under the ecumenical patriarch. But Geneva doesn't really have an Orthodox community there, like here. So you say to yourself, at this point, I don't see Nikitas or Elpidophoros actually moving, but I could be wrong. Okay. I could be wrong. People surprise you,
Yeah.
So,
I was just curious your thoughts. Thank you.
sure. Okay.
This was
All right.
great. You've been great both times I've been to class. I really learned a lot. So,
Thank you very
okay,
much. I
take
enjoyed
care. Kalapaska.
it. Carlo Pasca, take care. Bye-bye. Let's see, I have to turn this off here. Let's see here. Okay.